Welcome along, fellow time travelers and strange historians. This time around, we're going to travel back in time to check out the Collyer brothers. You're going to see some really cool snaps, some of which you may have never seen before. Before I begin, please like and share the show, and subscribe to my channel and hit the notification bell. Now please join me around the campfire. The fear of facing death in solitude, devoid of companionship or any comforting presence, is a profound horror for many. This terror is magnified by the knowledge of an inevitable death through starvation and dehydration, especially when the sole person who could have offered solace has already perished nearby weeks prior. Such was the grim fate of Homer Collyer at the age of 65. Bereft of friends, a spouse, or offspring, his only companion was his brother Langley. Through the unfolding of this narrative, it may become apparent that Langley's actions towards Homer were malevolent, effectively imprisoning his brother. After nearly a decade and a half of confinement, Homer's concluding years were spent blind and paralyzed, confined to a chair amidst chaos, anticipating his death while overhearing the sound of rats consuming his brother Langley's decomposing body, who had succumbed at least 2 weeks before. Without the means to seek assistance and forgotten by the world, Homer was resigned to a tragic demise, aware that his brother's death was the result of being ensnared in one of his own elaborate traps. These traps, ostensibly designed to ward off and possibly harm intruders due to Langley's intense protectiveness over their hoard and fear of theft, prompt a reconsideration. What if their true purpose was to prevent Homer's escape? Labeling the Collyer brothers as mere eccentric collectors might have diverted attention from the harsh reality that Langley was subjecting his brother to abuse. The neglect to investigate why Homer, once a well-connected attorney, vanished without a trace, ceasing all communication with his extensive social network, suggests a collective indifference to his plight. To understand the story of the Collyer brothers, we must begin our time travel journey inside their legendary New York City mansion. Imagine a dimly lit, narrow corridor inside an old brownstone, filled from floor to ceiling with an eclectic mix of items. Stacks of newspapers reaching the ceiling, old wooden furniture such as chairs and tables piled haphazardly, boxes of various sizes filled to the brim, and an assortment of household items like lamps, clocks, and radios creating narrow paths. The walls are lined with bookshelves, crammed with books, and there are clear signs of long-term neglect, such as cobwebs and dust. The lighting is dim, with only a faint light bulb casting shadows, making the path ahead look both mysterious and daunting. Langley devised an array of intricately designed booby traps amidst the clutter, consisting of piles of newspapers, books, furniture, and a vast collection of items that range from the mundane to the bizarre. The nature of these traps varied, but some accounts suggest that they could involve tunnels that collapsed if a certain item was moved, or items that were precariously balanced to fall on someone, triggering a trap. However, the specifics of how each trap worked are not well documented, largely due to the secretive nature of the Collyer brothers, and the fact that much of the information about them comes from sensationalized news accounts about their deaths. So, my fellow time travelers and strange historians, you believe you understand the story of the Collyer brothers' home because you were influenced by the narrative that's been presented to you. This version that I just described is widely accepted because it's what's been shared over time, and it paints a specific picture. But what if the reality of the supposed booby traps is questioned? Could it be that there were no booby traps, but rather an unfortunate accident where Langley was simply trapped under a collapse of accumulated items and was unable to free himself? The removal of their bodies and the clearing of the house revealed the extent of the hoarding and the dangerous conditions in which they lived. The Collyer brothers' story has since become an extreme example of hoarding behavior, and it highlights the risks and dangers associated with such conditions, not only to the individuals themselves, but also to first responders and others who might need to enter such environments. But why would anyone, including yourself, think that Homer was a hoarder when there was no evidence that he ever was? The Collyer brothers are considered to be the most infamous hoarders in American history because their Harlem townhouse was filled with over 140 tons of various objects, most of which went right into the trash after their story ended tragically in 1947, when they were both found dead among the hoarded possessions. Before I delve into their story, it is important to get an understanding of why they lived the way they did. The tale of the Collyer brothers extends beyond mere hoarding. It is a narrative deeply intertwined with abuse. The confinement of Homer Collyer by his brother Langley within their shared home for the last 15 years of Homer's life raises significant concerns about sibling abuse. Langley not only prevented Homer from leaving, but also restricted his interactions with the outside world, denying him medical and dental care, and forbidding police or others from intervening. Homer's existence was dominated by Langley's control, dictating his daily activities, from his seating and sleeping arrangements to his diet and personal hygiene practices. The full extent of Homer's suffering will never be fully known, but the nature of their relationship clearly involved abuse, leading to their tragic end. Homer's demise, marked by profound loneliness and despair, prompts a critical reflection on the necessity of intervening in such situations to safeguard the vulnerable. Hoarding disorder is characterized by a persistent difficulty in discarding or parting with possessions, regardless of their actual value. This difficulty is due to a perceived need to save the items and to distress associated with discarding them. Individuals with hoarding disorder accumulate possessions to the point where their living areas cannot be used effectively for their intended purposes. The treatment and understanding of hoarding behavior have evolved significantly throughout history, influenced by changes in medical knowledge, societal norms, and psychological theories. Historically, hoarding was not recognized as a distinct condition and was often seen through the lens of other mental health disorders, particularly obsessive compulsive disorder. Now let's talk about the Collyer brothers. In the late 1800s, Harlem, located in the northern section of the island of Manhattan in New York City, began to develop rapidly. Throughout the 19th century, it transformed from farmland into an affluent suburb for the city's well-to-do. With the construction of stately homes and the establishment of transportation links to Lower Manhattan, among the well-known people that lived in Harlem was the magician Houdini. However, by the early 1900s, Harlem experienced an economic downturn. The neighborhood was overbuilt, and many homes and apartments went unsold or unrented, leading to a real estate collapse. As a result, many of the wealthy, or formerly wealthy, residents of Harlem began to move out. One family that did not move out, however, was the Collyer family. Born in 1857, Herman Livingston Collyer was a respected gynecologist at Bellevue Hospital in Manhattan. Born in 1856, Susie Gage Frost Collyer was a former opera singer and Herman's first cousin. The family boasted of ancestral ties to England, claiming descent from passengers on the Fortune, which arrived in Massachusetts in 1621, closely following the Mayflower. The Collyer lineage included connections to the distinguished Livingston family of New York, dating back to the 18th century, with Robert Livingston being the first to immigrate to America in 1672. And so maybe their family did not go as far back as the Mayflower or the Fortune, but that is what they claimed. In any event, their son, Homer Lusk Collyer, was born on November 6, 1881. He was a brilliant child who was admitted to the College of the City of New York at 14 years old. He graduated with a bachelor's degree 6 years later. It's been said that Homer attended law school at Columbia University. And so yeah, he was a smart fellow. Their second son, Langley Wakeman Collyer, was born on October 3, 1885. It's been said that Langley also pursued further education at Columbia University, where he focused on engineering and chemistry. However, there is no proof that he actually attended either Columbia University or anywhere else. Langley, however, was a skilled concert pianist who once performed at Carnegie Hall, and he was heavily involved with Trinity Church. In 1909, the Collyer family settled into a 4-story brownstone in Harlem, located at 2078 Fifth Avenue. At the time, Homer was 28 and Langley was 24. Their father, Dr. Herman Collyer, was noted for his eccentric habits, including paddling by canoe to City Hospital on Blackwell's Island. When his workday was done, he would canoe north and then carry the canoe home to his brownstone. Now, personally, I think this was a brilliant idea. And honestly, if I was him at the time, I probably would have done the same thing. Just think, he never had to deal with Manhattan traffic. Around 1919, Dr. Herman and his wife Susie separated. Supposedly, he wanted to turn a portion of their large home into a medical facility for the long-term treatment of patients suffering from chronic illnesses or diseases. As you can imagine, his wife really didn't like the idea. So he moved out, and he relocated to a new home at 153 West 77th Street. Homer and Langley stayed in the Harlem home with their mother, and there are no accounts of either Homer or Langley ever having a girlfriend, or having been engaged or married. So make of that what you may. Following Dr. Herman Collyer's death in 1923, his sons inherited all his belongings, including medical equipment which they brought to their Harlem residence. At the time, Homer was 40 and Langley was 38, and they were both still living at home with their mother. 5 years later, for reasons unknown, their gas supply was discontinued, and they abandoned modern utilities like running water and steam heating. Instead, they opted for kerosene for lighting and cooking, and Langley would fetch water from a public fountain located 4 blocks away. Such drastic changes in their lifestyle were notably inconsistent with their educational background and social standing. Their mother, Susie Collyer, passed away in 1929, bequeathing all her possessions and the family home to her sons, who never married. At the time, Hoarder was 49 and Langley was 44. Neither had a girlfriend, neither were engaged, neither were married, and neither had children. Why do you think these two intelligent, successful, handsome men never dated or married women or had any children? And why did they instead choose to only spend their time together? If neither one of them were attracted to women, and they spent so much time together, is it possible that there was an incestuous relationship between the two? Kindly share your thoughts about that in the comments below. Following their mother's passing in 1929, Hoarder and Langley remained in the Harlem brownstone that they had inherited, and they initially maintained a semblance of a social life and regular outings. So they did have friends and other acquaintances that they saw. They weren't always reclusive. In fact, during this phase of his career, Hoarder was working under John R. McMullen, a lawyer who would eventually become the Collyer family's legal advisor. Afterward, Hoarder took a position with City Title Insurance, where he engaged in research at the New York City Hall of Records. Throughout this time, he was recognized for his refined behavior and his fondness for attire that echoed the 19th century, lending him a noticeably Victorian appearance and leading others to liken him to a gentleman from the 1880s. It's been said that Langley would dress the same way. Langley, of course, was not an attorney, and even though he supposedly went to college to learn about engineering, he decided to dedicate his life to selling pianos and tinkering with his own inventions. Both brothers were also heavily engaged in teaching Sunday school at Trinity Church, and so they obviously had no fear of interacting with other people. And they did have friends and acquaintances, and a bit of a social life. In fact, the Collyer brothers were characterized by their courteous and well-behaved nature, but they were considered to be introverted. The sole indication of their unorthodox way of living was their firm rule of never permitting any guests to enter their home. For reasons unknown, in 1931, the Collyer brothers began to refuse to pay any of their bills or income taxes. In 1932, Hoarder acquired a property opposite their residence for $8,000. His intention was to generate income from rental apartments within the building. However, that venture never came to fruition. That's because in 1933, at the age of 52, Hoarder Collyer lost his sight due to hemorrhages behind his eyes. His brother Langley, who was 48 at the time, supposedly ceased all professional and personal and social activities for the sole purpose of dedicating himself exclusively to Hoarder's care. This assumption makes it seem like Langley began one of the most selfless acts anyone could ever engage in. But in all actuality, this is when Hoarder's strange nightmare began. That's because from this point forward, Hoarder was at the complete mercy of his brother Langley, who, we could only assume, was manipulative, conniving, and cruel. The amount of sibling abuse, which may have included mental, emotional, physical, and perhaps even sexual, is staggering to consider. And yet no one on earth cared enough to try to help Hoarder. No one cared enough to check in on the man that some knew as their employee, or co-worker, or friend, or neighbor, or cousin, or uncle. From that point forward, his younger brother Langley would be in complete charge of his older brother's life. Langley would decide if and when and how Hoarder would bathe, sleep, eat, use the toilet, or have any freedoms at all. By all accounts, Homer was a brilliant and talented man. And yet we know of not one single letter being dictated by him going to anyone anywhere at any time. Now perhaps he asked Langley to write some for him, and Langley never did. Or he never sent them. And then he could tell Homer, "Hey, I sent them. Clearly nobody cares enough to write back to you." Imagine what Homer must have felt like if and when Langley told him that. Think about this. Just because Homer went blind doesn't mean he would never want to correspond with anyone ever again except his brother. If you went blind, at any age, would you suddenly stop communicating with everyone on earth except your cruel sibling? If you could no longer work, and yet you were rolling in dough, and you lived in a place like New York City, wouldn't you still go to the opera, the symphony, Broadway, concerts, or anywhere just like you did before? Wouldn't you at least go for a walk in the park? Would going blind really be sufficient for you to never leave your home ever again? Never to see a doctor? Never to see a dentist? Never to even step outside your front door to get some fresh air and sunshine? And yet, that is how it turned out. Homer was isolated. Homer was trapped. Homer had no hope of escape from being held hostage. Think about how cruel Langley Collyer was. He supposedly devised a special diet of eating 100 oranges a week in order to cure his brother's blindness. You buying that story? You think that story is true? If so, how did Homer feel about this? What choice did he have in the matter? How would you feel if your sibling compelled you to eat 100 oranges a week for the rest of your life? Even if you believed and trusted in your sibling, wouldn't you still seek some medical advice? With access to a vast array of medical books, Langley claimed he felt equipped to manage his brother's condition himself. Or maybe he didn't. And forcing his brother to eat 100 oranges a week was simply one of the many ways in which he tormented his older brother. Perhaps he was envious of him for going to Columbia University, for graduating with a law degree, for being respected, and for all we know, perhaps even having an interest in a particular lady, and she having a particular interest in him. Who knows what drove Langley to behave the way he did? Langley supposedly collected newspapers for Homer, claiming that he anticipated the day when Homer would be able to read them. But perhaps they were collected for a more sinister reason. Perhaps he collected the newspapers in order to build barriers around Homer. Langley sealed all the doors and windows of the brownstone, and he used his engineering know-how to rig a complex system of traps and passages among their accumulated items, supposedly to ward off thieves and vandals. But once again, did he do that to keep others out, or to keep Homer in? After all, Homer was blind, and with all the hoarded items all around him, and only narrow paths to be able to go from one room to the next, how on earth would Homer ever be able to figure out how to escape from his own home? In the 1930s, the property on West 77th Street that was once owned by their father was sold. The new owner stumbled upon a Model T Ford in the basement, the presence of which was unexplained. The new owner had the car taken apart and had the pieces left out on the street. Discovering this, Langley embarked on the laborious task of moving each part back to his Fifth Avenue residence. Since the brothers lacked electricity, Langley claimed that he tried connecting a generator to the car's engine in order to produce power, a project that ultimately failed. And now, my fellow time travelers and strange historians, we get to 1938. 5 years of abuse continued, with Homer being held hostage by his younger brother. Imagine how sad and lonely it must have been for Homer to not be able to speak with or hear from anyone except his abusive brother. Imagine years going by with no sunlight or fresh air. Imagine how often Homer likely daydreamed about getting out of there, and perhaps being in a house outside of New York City, or being somewhere, anywhere, but where he was. I'm going to repeat that several times because it is something you need to think about. Because chances are we have all been lied to about the Collyer brothers. Their relationship needs more analysis. This was not the story of two loving siblings who just wanted their freedom and to be left alone. There were plenty of ways that they could have been alone if that is truly what they wanted. They had the financial means to move any time they wanted to, or at the very least get out of town. But Langley never made that decision for them. Instead, he preferred staying in Manhattan and tormenting his brother. And no one cared enough about Homer to stop it. It's been said that Homer's only link to the outside world was a crystal radio set. Other than that, the only voices he ever heard were the result of his brother's mental and emotional abuse. By the way, the terms mental abuse and emotional abuse are often used interchangeably, as both involve the manipulation and degradation of the victim's sense of self-worth and emotional well-being. However, there can be nuanced differences in their focus and implications. As far as emotional abuse, this form of abuse primarily targets the victim's emotions and feelings, aiming to inflict pain, fear, or distress through verbal and nonverbal behaviors. Emotional abuse includes actions like humiliation, constant criticism, belittling, intimidation, isolation, and manipulation of emotions and relationships. It seeks to undermine the victim's self-esteem, induce anxiety, and foster a sense of powerlessness and dependency on the abuser. Think about how many times Langley probably told Homer that no one cared about him, that no one came to see him, that no one wrote to him, and that any letters he may have written were never returned. And then we've got mental abuse, sometimes considered a subset of emotional abuse or used synonymously. Mental abuse can be seen as specifically targeting the victim's cognitive processes and their ability to think, reason, and perceive reality. It includes tactics such as gaslighting, making the victim doubt their own memory, perception, or sanity, spreading falsehoods, creating confusion, and using mind games to exert control. Mental abuse can lead to cognitive dissonance, decreased mental acuity, and difficulty in making decisions. Who knows how many and what kind of lies Langley told his brother? Remember, this was just after World War II ended. Langley could have told his brother that there was a war, and that most of the people in Manhattan and around the United States, and maybe even around the world, are dead, and that Langley was protecting him, and that even if Homer could escape, there was nowhere to go. And perhaps that is part of why Langley chose to not have any power, no electricity, no running water, and never let anybody enter their home. Even when it comes to the radio set, it was Langley who chose what Homer could listen to, which most likely was only pre-recorded productions. In 1938, the New York Times featured an article detailing a real estate agent's effort to buy a property from the Collyer brothers for $100,000. That would be the equivalent to $1.4 million as of the time of this recording. A journalist from the New York World Telegram managed to get an interview with Langley, during which he provided a glimpse into their secluded life. Dubbed the Mystery Man of Harlem by the reporter, some of the text was as follows. The Collyer brothers have lived in the house without gas or electricity since 1928, when service was cut off. Langley said in an interview recently that he could make his own electricity from a generator he built himself, but that he preferred to cook and heat the place with kerosene. He said that despite that the house was boarded up, it was cool and comfortable, that there was always a breeze, and that it was shaded by a large tree in front of it. As a result of the article, the Collyer brothers became the center of intense public fascination and sensational rumors. Tales abounded of their home being a treasure trove of opulent furniture, a vast collection of books, and large amounts of cash, which Langley supposedly declined to bank. Depicted as wealthy hermits, they were rumored to amass a fortune in valuable belongings, drawing curious onlookers and provoking local youths into acts of vandalism, such as breaking windows. In response to their windows being targeted, Langley opted to board them up instead of replacing them. Despite their apparent wealth, Langley was rumored to forage for food and garbage, seek leftovers from butchers, and to even journey to Williamsburg in Brooklyn for the cheapest stale bread to buy, claiming his choice of ragged attire was a precaution against robbery, underscoring his wary stance on their public image and safety. As fascination with the brothers escalated, Langley's fear and paranoia grew. It was then, some assume, that he began to convert their accumulated piles of items into an intricate network of mazes, tunnels, and traps. But the fact is, nobody really knows when that began. However, given the abuse that Langley clearly inflicted on Homer, it prompts a re-evaluation of the purpose behind these elaborate defenses. Once again, kindly consider that rather than merely keeping intruders out, could they have been designed to imprison Homer? Considering Homer's blindness, frailty, and total dependence on Langley, escaping from such a situation would have seemed an insurmountable challenge. (1939). Another year of abuse continued, with Homer being held hostage by his younger brother. The Collyers made headlines in April 1939 when, armed with a legal mandate, a city marshal and Consolidated Edison Company representative entered the Collyer brothers' properties on Fifth Avenue to remove gas meters that had been unused since 1928. This event attracted a crowd reportedly numbering up to 1,000 onlookers, who were eager to witness the unfolding situation. This event marked one of the rare occasions when Homer was supposedly seen outside their home. Now at this point, who knows how much Homer had been brainwashed by his brother? Even though Homer was clearly being held hostage by Langley, he did not use this opportunity to escape. That was likely because hostages or abuse victims often develop a psychological alliance with their captors or abusers during captivity and prolonged periods of intimidation. This bond, paradoxically, is a survival strategy, wherein the victim empathizes with and may even defend their oppressor, often due to the perceived threat to their survival and the kindness-submission cycle they experience at the hands of the abuser. I hope you're enjoying the show so far. Before I continue, can you please do me a favor and like and share the show, and kindly subscribe to my channel and hit the notification bell. Three more years of abuse continued, with Homer being held hostage by his younger brother. In August 1942, the Bowery Savings Bank began foreclosure on the Collyer brothers' property due to an outstanding mortgage of $6,700 and interest payments due since 1940. The situation escalated to the state Supreme Court, which authorized eviction. On the day of the ruling, the Collyer's attorney, John R. McMullen, negotiated a potential repurchase of the home with bank officials, given the property's poor condition and the bank's hesitance to assume ownership. McMullen, who had never visited the cluttered home, discussed the buyback with Langley during a rare daytime visit to McMullen's office. The bank's real estate VP allowed the brothers time to finalize the repurchase details. However, no repurchase agreement was made, and by October, a Supreme Court justice had ordered the brothers' eviction. Despite the bank's attempts to avoid force, with multiple unheeded eviction notices, it now owned the building and had to meet city building and health codes. And so a work crew began. Health Department ordered repairs in September, which drew public attention. Langley interrupted the work and demanded that the workers depart until a city order validated their presence. On November 19th, after ignoring further notices, the eviction was enforced by a team including deputies, a police captain, a sheriff's physician, a bank representative, and locksmiths. Despite their efforts, they were met with silence and were unable to enter due to severe obstructions. Eventually, they were stymied by a fortified rear entrance blocked by wire netting and piles of items. Weary and frustrated, the eviction team gathered again at the house's front, deciding to attempt entry through a window. Joseph Cohen, a locksmith, scaled up a high window ledge and successfully pried the shutters open. After breaking a window pane with a hammer, he climbed inside, leaving his son Herman on the ledge, watching as his father disappeared into a cloud of dust. He would later say that the interior was packed with various items, including heaps of ancient sheet music, elaborate picture frames, holiday ornaments, pieces of plaster figurines, stacks of books, and garden baskets. Joseph made his way downstairs to the main door, where he and Deputy Murray forged a path through the thick dust while struggling to breathe. Opening a door into the hallway, they encountered further blockades. A weary voice from the darkness asked, "What is the meaning of this?" Deputy Murray announced the eviction notice. Langley then asked for Mr. McMullen, who, from the other side of the clutter, encouraged Langley to settle the matter to prevent eviction. Taking his lawyer's advice, Langley accepted a pen from the deputy and signed a check right then and there for the full mortgage amount of $6,700, which is about $110,000 at the time of this recording, which settled the matter without further legal action. Another 7 months of abuse continued, with Homer being held hostage by his younger brother. In February 1943, the IRS announced that Homer Collyer owed $1,900 in overdue income tax, along with accumulated interest from the previous 12 years. That's the equivalent of nearly $33,000 as of the time of this recording. They issued a warning that his property at 2077 Fifth Avenue, which he had plans to transform into apartments, faced auction on February 3rd if the debt wasn't cleared. Mr. McMullen, maintaining a hopeful outlook, anticipated a resolution at the 11th hour, similar to past instances, despite challenges in reaching the brothers. On the day of the auction, IRS officials delayed in hope, but ultimately, the property went to auction and received no bids. With Mr. McMullen present and no interested buyers, the government took ownership by default. Discouraged by the building's poor condition and the questionable value of proceeding with the auction, given an additional $3,000 in city taxes owed since 1938. That's just over $51,000 as of the day of this recording. According to the rules, the government was required to offer Homer an opportunity to reclaim his property. Nonetheless, he never took advantage of this chance, and it appears the government refrained from further efforts to take over the building, as subsequent events would unfold. 3 more years of horrifying abuse continued, with Homer being held hostage by his younger brother. Imagine how sad and lonely it must have been for Homer to not be able to speak with or hear from anyone except his abusive brother. Once again, imagine years going by with no sunlight or fresh air. Imagine how often Homer likely daydreamed about getting out of there and perhaps being in a house outside of New York City, or being somewhere, anywhere but where he was. On July 23, 1946, while on patrol, 2 police officers heard suspicious noises emanating from 2077 Fifth Avenue, and they discovered 2 individuals stealing plumbing and electrical fixtures from the building. During the altercation, they managed to capture one of the thieves, a 25-year-old homeless man named George Smith. One officer sustained a leg injury after falling through a damaged section of the floor during the incident. When encouraged to press charges against the thief, Langley Collyer communicated through his locked door, but ultimately declined to file a complaint. However, Langley was still named as the complainant and faced the possibility of a subpoena should he not show up in court. After a number of efforts by an officer to deliver the subpoena, Langley eventually accepted it, indicating that the threat of legal action was necessary to persuade him to leave his rundown home. On July 27th, Langley, donning clothing reminiscent of the previous century, which is how Homer used to dress, appeared in felony court to lodge a formal complaint against Smith. The case was further complicated by the fact that the Collyers were no longer the legal owners of 2077 Fifth Avenue. Before making the complaint, Langley claimed,
"My invalid brother, Homerless Collyer, and I still possess the keys to that house, and consider ourselves its owners."
He also voiced intentions to legally challenge the ownership, disputing the government's tax claims due to their non-existent income. This event marked Langley's 3rd courtroom appearance concerning unauthorized entry into the property. The final known public engagement of the Collyers related to a separate tax dispute over 2 parcels of inherited land in Queens County in New York City. After Langley failed to respond to 2 court notices, the city proceeded to seize the land, compensating them $7,500, which is the equivalent of $114,000 as of the time of this recording, a sum significantly below its actual value, in light of an alleged $27,000 in outstanding taxes. That would be the equivalent of $360,000 as of the time of this recording. By March of 1947, Homer, the formerly talented musician and lawyer, with countless interests and hopes and dreams for himself, had been a victim of 15 years of continued mental, emotional, and perhaps physical and sexual abuse by his younger brother and neglect. Imagine how sad and lonely it must have been for Homer to not be able to speak with or hear from anyone except his abusive brother. Once again, imagine entire years going by, receiving no sunlight or breathing in any fresh air. Imagine, if you can, how often Homer likely daydreamed about getting out of there and perhaps being in a house outside of New York City, or being somewhere, anywhere but where he was. On March 21st, 1947, the police were alerted by a caller identifying himself as Mr. Charles Smith about a dead body in the Collyer mansion. Despite receiving many false alarms over the years, the authorities were obligated to investigate. The last incident of this nature saw Sergeant Collins from the 123rd Street Precinct taking a direct approach to verify the allegations himself. After some persuasion, Langley eventually allowed the officer access through the basement door. Sergeant Collins then spent the next 30 minutes navigating a labyrinth of cluttered passageways, brimming with refuse and rigged with makeshift traps, before finally reaching the bedroom where Homer was found. Recounting the experience, Sergeant Collins stated, quote, "Upon shining my flashlight, I was met with the sight of Homer, sitting upright, as if he were a mummy. He was perched on a cot. A burlap sack lied beneath him, and an old overcoat positioned at the foot of the cot. He then spoke to me, declaring,
'I am Homer Collyer, a lawyer. I demand your badge number. I am not deceased. I am merely blind and paralyzed.'"
After this incident, Langley lodged a formal complaint against Sergeant Collins for the intrusion, although it appears that no subsequent legal measures were pursued. It is assumed that sort of thing would happen again, so they continued on. Finding the front door impassable, they enlisted the help of Police Emergency Squad 6. By 10 a.m., the area was secured and attracted around 600 onlookers as officers commenced their entry, initially thwarted by piles of hoarded items. Opting for a different tactic, the team borrowed ladders from the fire department to reach the second-story windows. Most shutters were sealed shut, but at 12:10 p.m., Patrolman William Barker managed to enter through a window. After a brief disappearance, he emerged, confirming the presence of a dead body inside. Detective John Lowry climbed up next to survey the situation, while others tackled the front door, only to be met by another horde of newspapers and assorted items, which proved too dense to clear. Detective Lowry described seeing the emaciated figure of an elderly man, identified as Homer Collyer, wearing a tattered robe. The medical examiner later confirmed the man had been dead for approximately 10 hours by 3:35 p.m. The focus then turned to finding Langley Collyer, who was nowhere to be found. Given Langley's absence and usual patterns of moving in and out through a basement door, his absence puzzled the police, especially given their difficulties with entry. The New York Times reported on the clutter-filled basement entrance, highlighting the severity of the hoarding issue. Homer Collyer's body was taken for an autopsy. Outside, the crowd buzzed with speculation about hidden treasures amid the chaos, fueled by rumors of concealed wealth. Police continued their search, meticulously cataloging items, including newspapers that dated as far back as 1915, before sealing the house by 5 p.m. Attorney McMullen collected important documents, anticipating contact from Langley soon. Langley's disappearance sparked widespread speculation, including theories of his prolonged absences on shopping trips. Adding to the intrigue, William Rodriguez, self-identified as the informant Charles Smith, came forward, explaining his initial hesitation to get involved. His account, involving an anonymous tip-off about the Collyer situation, only deepened the public's captivation and speculation surrounding the case. A police detail was posted outside the Collyer mansion to monitor for Langley's anticipated return. By March 27th, Langley remained elusive, though police uncovered a cigar box filled with various firearms and another holding 34 bank books, showing a total savings of just over $3,000. That would be the equivalent of $51,000 as of the day of this recording. On March 28th, overwhelmed with tips about Langley's whereabouts, police extended their search to Brooklyn and deserted sites in Asbury Park, New Jersey, locations the brothers had frequented in the past. Items that were taken out of Langley's home were brought to an empty school for appraisal. The brothers' attorney took custody of Homer's remains from the morgue and arranged for him to be buried at Cypress Hill Cemetery, where the family had a plot. Homer's funeral had a modest turnout, with supposedly only 2 of the attendees having actually personally known him. Concurrently, a lead took police to New Jersey following a report from a waitress who believed she had served Langley and claimed she saw him heading toward Atlantic City. Meanwhile, Mr. McMullen clung to the hope that Langley might yet surface, amidst continuing speculation about his whereabouts. In a bid to widen the search, police disseminated 500 photographs of Langley across several states, while the clearing of the house continued, with 19 tons of debris removed by the second day. The public administrator announced that Langley's estate would bear the cost of storing the home's valuable contents, as deliberations about the property's future began. The investigation seemed to draw to a close with the discovery of a body in Pugsley's Creek in the East Bronx, fitting Langley's description. This avenue quickly closed, however, when the deceased was identified as an elderly man missing from a local houseboat, prolonging the mystery of Langley's whereabouts. During their thorough investigation of the Collyer mansion, police discovered an eclectic assortment of items, which I will list for you soon. The initial clearing of the first floor resulted in the removal of over 19 tons of rubbish. The clearance efforts extended over the next week, with 84 tons of debris being cleared from the home. This included leftovers from their father's medical practice and various objects that Langley had accumulated over time. The unusual cleanup operation attracted approximately 2,000 spectators who gathered to watch the significant undertaking. By April 7th, the cleanup operation of the Collier's residence had led to the extraction of roughly 103 tons of junk, 22 tons of which were removed on that day itself. Among the unearthed items, 5 violins stood out, earmarked for appraisal. The detectives in charge estimated another week to 10 days would be required to fully clear out the premises. Detective Charles Myers, of the Missing Persons Bureau, believed all signs pointed to Langley's demise occurring within the home. He highlighted that an examination of Homer revealed an empty stomach, leading Myers to assert that, quote, Homer died from neglect, end quote, finding it unlikely that Langley would leave his brother or miss his burial without a significant reason. This hypothesis was confirmed on April 8, 1947, when Langley was found caught in one of his booby traps in the same room as Homer, just 10 feet away. The discovery was made in the afternoon, following the removal of 17 tons of rubbish from the second floor. Langley was in a cramped passageway, encircled by bed springs and a trunk, his remains badly decomposed and partially devoured by rats, concealed under a suitcase, stacks of newspapers, and 3 metal bread bins. Detective Joseph Whitmore informed the press of the find, crediting himself and Detective John Lowry for uncovering Langley amidst the debris. Pharmacist Jacob Iglitzen verified the identity and attire of the corpse, despite its decomposed state. The revelation drew a massive audience, with numbers growing from 500 to over 2,000 onlookers. Upon his arrival, Police Commissioner Arthur W. Wallander commended the investigative work. Medical examiner Thomas A. Gonzalez reported that Langley had passed away between 2 to 4 weeks earlier, with his death caused by starvation or suffocation. The source of the foul odor permeating the residence was traced back to Langley's, not Homer's, concealed corpse. Langley's funeral was held on April 11th at Cypress Hill Cemetery, officiated by Reverend Dr. Charles T. Bridgman of Trinity Church. It was attended by 40 people, including numerous family members. Finally, both brothers were together again, laid to rest with their parents at Cypress Hill Cemetery in Brooklyn in a quiet reunion. During the comprehensive cleanup of the Collyer brownstone, authorities and workers removed approximately 120 tons of items, spanning from antiques to ordinary trash. This collection featured an array of objects, including more than 25,000 books, including thousands about medicine, engineering, and more than 2,500 on the law, infant and doll carriages, rusty bicycles, a box of potato peelers, lots of empty bottles. There were cans of food buried under layers of waste, a variety of firearms, glass chandeliers, a kerosene stove, a child's chair, a wide array of clocks, rusty bed springs, ornamental tapestries, and hundreds of yards of unused silks and fabrics, bowling balls and bowling gear, various dress mannequins, a sawhorse, photography equipment, painted portraits, early 20th century pin-up girl images, plaster busts, jars containing human organs which most certainly once belonged to their father, including the obsolete X-ray machine, the frame of a Model T Ford, the folding top of a horse-drawn carriage. It's been said that there were 14 pianos of different styles within the home, a clavichord, string and wind instruments, as well as a gramophone and a heck of a lot of records. Now, there's been a lot of talk about the numerous pianos in the Collyer mansion, yet it's uncertain if the reported figure is exactly accurate. And considering Langley's background as a pianist and the spaciousness of their mansion, the presence of several pianos of various sizes might not be as extraordinary as it's portrayed. In reality, all the things I've mentioned may not be so peculiar after all. It leads one to wonder what might be discovered in anybody's home after they pass. Now, granted, the mansion did contain an overwhelming collection of newspapers and magazines, but finding Mr. Collyer's hope chest within the home was quite normal, and the discovery of 8 live cats wandering the premises didn't strike me as odd either. I've had that many cats myself at one point. To be honest, the inventory of items found might sound more alarming than it genuinely was. Although there was the excess of paper and numerous items that could have been discarded, most of it didn't seem like a major issue to me. Upon reflection, labeling both brothers as hoarders seems unjust. Many of the items in the mansion had belonged to their parents. It's also unreasonable to categorize Homer as a hoarder, especially considering there's no evidence that he was one before he lost his sight. After becoming blind and confined to the mansion, it's unlikely he could have contributed to the hoarding, given his inability to see or leave the house. It appears that Langley not only constrained his brother, but, through his actions, irreversibly marred Homer's reputation. Langley's evil influence seems to extend beyond their deaths and continues to affect how Homer is remembered. Simply put, it's unfair to attribute Langley's behavior onto Homer. Now let's jump to June of 1947. Following the revelations at the Collyer home, the narrative took a fresh twist. Robert F. Wagner Jr., the Housing and Buildings Commissioner, announced that the Collyer property at 2078 Fifth Avenue remained heavily cluttered with waste and debris, constituting a severe health risk. He tasked Francis J. Mulligan, the public administrator overseeing the Collyer brothers' estate, with clearing the site for evaluation. The aim was to appraise the property and obtain permission from the state Supreme Court to tear it down. On June 30th, Justice J. Edward Lombard granted the demolition, after inspections uncovered critical structural deficiencies, including water damage, decaying roof beams, and unsafe floors across the edifice. The city intended to request bids for demolishing the building, leading to the ultimate dismantling of the Collyer mansion. The story culminated when the now empty plot at the corner of 128th Street was auctioned off on March 1st, 1951. Jumping ahead to October of 1952, Attorney McMullen indicated intentions to discuss estate management with Joseph A. Cox, representing the city's public administrator. The bulk of the items recovered were deemed valueless and discarded, while those deemed sellable fetched around $2,000 at auction. Nonetheless, the net value of the Collyer brothers' estate was estimated at $91,000. which is about $1.5 million as of the time of this recording, with $20,000 coming from personal belongings such as jewelry, cash, and securities. The estate drew claims from 56 relatives, mainly first and second cousins. Among the claimants was Ella Davis from Pittsburgh, who asserted she was a long-lost sister of the Collyers, but her claim was rejected due to lack of proof. This was not her first time making such claims. She previously claimed to be the widow of a wealthy hermit who was murdered in 1937. In October of 1952, the court in New York County decided that 23 claimants would equally share the estate. Among the more unusual items found, some were displayed at Hubert's Dime Museum, known for its collection of remarkable human oddities and sideshow performances. A particularly noteworthy item was the chair where Homer Collyer was found deceased. This chair was later sold to private collectors after the museum stopped exhibiting it in 1956. The story of the Collyer brothers, Homer and Langley, offers several valuable lessons. Isolation can be detrimental. The brothers' extreme isolation from society led to their physical and mental decline. Their reclusiveness prevented them from seeking help or engaging with others, exacerbating their hoarding tendencies and contributing to their tragic demise. This highlights the importance of maintaining social connections and seeking support when needed. The dangers of hoarding. Hoarding behavior not only posed significant health and safety risks to Homer and Langley, but also became a burden on the community. Their home became a hazard to public health, attracting vermin and causing structural damage. This underscores the importance of addressing hoarding behavior early on and seeking professional help to prevent its escalation. Mental health awareness and intervention. The Collyer brothers' case emphasizes the need for increased awareness of mental health issues and the importance of early intervention. Langley's extreme behavior likely stemmed from underlying mental health issues, such as obsessive-compulsive disorder or social anxiety, or both. Greater efforts should be made to recognize and support individuals struggling with mental health challenges before they reach a crisis point. Compassion and understanding. Despite the bizarre and extreme nature of their situation, the Collyer brothers were individuals in need of compassion and understanding. Instead of sensationalizing their story or treating them as objects of curiosity, there should have been more efforts to provide them with appropriate support and assistance. And someone in some government agency should have been tasked with locating Homer when he first went blind to ascertain his wants and needs, and should have been tasked to check up on him periodically. Community involvement and responsibility. The Collyer brothers' case highlights the role of the community in identifying and addressing issues of hoarding and mental health. Greater community involvement, awareness, and support networks can help prevent similar situations from occurring in the future and ensure that individuals in need receive the assistance they require. Overall, the story of the Collyer brothers serves as a cautionary tale about the consequences of isolation, untreated mental illness, and unchecked hoarding behavior. It underscores the importance of proactive intervention, community support, and compassion in addressing complex mental health and social challenges. The case of Langley and Homer Collyer is a deeply tragic story that highlights the complex issues surrounding mental health, social isolation, and the responsibility of society to intervene in cases of potential abuse or neglect. So what do you think about this story? What do you think of the behavior of Langley Collyer? Would you describe it as a form of sibling abuse? Especially since it clearly involved controlling behavior, physical confinement, and neglect of Homer's basic needs and medical care. It's important, of course, that we consider the context of the times and the understanding of mental health issues, as well as the societal mechanisms in place for intervention in such cases. Today, there are more resources and a greater understanding of the need for intervention when someone is in danger of abuse or neglect, regardless of the familial relationship. Today, social services, mental health professionals, and law enforcement are more equipped and inclined to intervene when there are signs of abuse or neglect. The question of whether someone should have insisted on seeing Homer to ensure his well-being touches on the broader issues of community and societal responsibility toward individuals who may be isolated or in danger. It suggests the importance of vigilance, compassion, and taking action when there are signs that someone may be in distress or danger, even when it involves stepping into complex family dynamics. Ultimately, the Collyer brothers' story is a sad reminder of the consequences of severe mental illness when left untreated, and the potential for harm in abusive or neglectful relationships. It also raises questions about the balance between respecting individuals' autonomy and the duty to protect those who are vulnerable or unable to care for themselves. And so, my fellow time travelers and strange historians, this concludes this story of the Collyer brothers. Kindly remember to like, share, and subscribe, and hit the notification bell, because there will be more shows like this one, and I hope you check those out too. Please check out the links below to learn how to support my research and productions. Specifically, I'd really appreciate it if you could become a member of my channel and or join me on Patreon. You could also leave a super thanks in the comments below. Kindly be kind to all non-human animals and please don't eat them. They don't like that. Remember, for the benefit of compassion for all living things and their own health, brilliant people throughout history chose a plant-based diet. And please do yourself a favor and go to a local shelter and adopt a cat or a dog or both. You and they will be very glad that you did. Until next time, I wish you safe travels on all your journeys.